I think you guys could go ahead. Worst comes to worst, I'll just get to the microphone.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, it's Ben Shores.
Hey guys, if you're over here, you're gonna come on over here so you're in front of us more. So good. Come on over. Get close. Get close.
He's a blind.
Hey, come on over here.
One, I'm terrible. Yeah.
Did you take it up like 3 checks?
Those have like people drop out of the game or whatever, right? But you still build that game, like you build it and you're gonna do a full time seal.
This is on.
Yeah, you want to sit over here?
Oh yeah.
No, you're fine.
Problem. you doing?
I've been.
Still showing sandwiches.
I feel like go on the road here. The full suits
I know,
on.
really.
Three Bens and a Curtis, that's what we call it.
All right. So we're late because of me. My apologies. And there's just so many people out there, and it's so great to get to reconnect with just everyone. And I've been here now for 10 years. So that makes me the gray beard of this panel. And I look down here at these gentlemen. And this is a panel discussion on, I think I'm sitting in Robert Siegel's seat now too, which is really cool. Oh, well, pretty cool too. So this is a panel on sports communication and trends within sports communication, which I think gives us enough latitude to talk about whatever we want to over the course of this panel. But I'd like to start, and I know there's 3 Bens up here, but I'd like to let you introduce yourselves and just talk a little bit about where you're at in your careers.
All right. How you guys doing? Almost done, right? All right. Well, I'm Ben Creighton, class of 2014. Obviously, went here to Washington State. Great to be back in Pullman. Definitely not the same kind of weather as I'm dealing with in Little Rock, Arkansas right now, which is high 70s. So it was definitely a bit of a shock flying in a couple days ago. But like I mentioned, I'm currently one of the sports anchors at the Fox station in Little Rock, Arkansas. I've been there now for about a year and a half, but like I said, I went here to Washington State. I was the head sports director over at KUGR, participated in Murrow News 8. And then before I got to Little Rock, I did play-by-play for the University of Portland, and I also worked at the ABC station in Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah, I'm Ben Weinman, class of 2016. Ben Shores, Ben Creighton, Ben Weinman, and Curtis.
Hey.
I'm a sports anchor for ABC Fox Montana in Missoula, Montana, and I cover the University of Montana Grizzlies, the Montana State Bobcats, a lot of high school sports. We have a minor league baseball team in Missoula, and then a lot of fly fishing and skiing and lots of things that the Treasure State has to offer. I did a lot of Cable 8 here here at Washington State. Did some stuff with Pac-12 Networks. Interned at KHQ Television up in Spokane. Interned at Fox Sports Live in Los Angeles my junior year. So yeah, excited to be back. Thanks for having us.
Hey guys, my name is Curtis Calhoun. I am from Seattle, Washington. I work at Sports Radio 950 KJR. I cover both professional and collegiate athletics, so I do everything from the Mariners, Seahawks, Sounders, and also the Huskies, and the Cougars too. So mainly focusing as a sports anchor and reporter for 950 KJR, so doing sports updates every hour, working with the talk shows, getting my own audio, interviewing, all that stuff. Graduated in May of 2016, and during my time here, I was the sports director at KUGR, and I was also in Murrow News 8 and Cable 8 as well.
So before we get into the trends in sports communication, can you talk a little bit, you're all fairly young.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how the reality of your work differed from the expectations you may have had as a student or as a fan growing up? Maybe we'll start with Curtis and then come back.
I think for me, especially my senior year of college, I really didn't understand that I really was going to be on my own in terms of getting my own stuff. And there are people to help you along the way when you're in the career, but it's definitely not like the resources that you have in college. So definitely take the time, get to know your professors, get to know all the people that you have as advisors, everything like that. So it's definitely one of those things where, especially working in a big market like Seattle, which is my hometown, but it's still a big market. The expectations are really big. You definitely have an appreciation for the resources that start here and the help that you get here.
I think my biggest realization is that my entire life I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, I wanted to be a sports anchor on television. Knew that from the very get-go. I thought every day was going to be a great day. You always hear the people talk about like, I never worked a day in my life. It was awesome. That's complete BS. If anyone ever tells you that they never worked a day in their life, they're not challenging themselves. Because when I got there, my first couple months were really difficult. And I was like looking around and thinking like, oh my gosh, my whole life I want to do this, and it's not what I was thinking. believe me, the days, it gets better. And so I think that was my biggest piece of advice, or it's something that I learned at least, is just not every day has to be a great day to make it your dream job.
Yeah, going off of what he said, I have those days too. That was one of the first realizations that I had, is that you're not going to have a great day every single day,
Right.
but at the same time, you're going to have to fight and make sure that the next day is better than the last. But one other thing that I kind of learned very early is just the amount of work and the amount of hours that you put in. It's very fun work. There's no question about that. But there will be days where, like, okay, I'm going to a Razorback game in the morning, and then that night I have to get back and anchor the 9 o'clock news. There are some days you work like 12 hours, and then there's some days you only work maybe 5 or 6. So that was the biggest adjustment that I had to get used to very quickly, was just the long hours. But like I said, it's a lot of fun. But eventually, when you get back to your apartment, you fall face first into your pillow.
So if we start looking at some of these trends, and we'll touch on a few, and then I'd like to just open it up in a few minutes so that you all can ask your questions. But I'm obligated to ask a few here as the moderator.
Yep.
When we look at the trends, many people want to be on television or on the radio. They want to have the jobs that you have. Particularly among this younger population, we don't see people tuning in to the nightly news as much. Even vaunted Sports Center has seen its ratings come down with cable cutters. What do you envision for the next 10 years of sports broadcasting and sports journalism? What is it going to look like?
Well, I think you're already seeing it pretty quickly, how it's making that transition to social media, because, like you said, the audience for local news is getting older and older, and I'm sure a lot of you, like, how many people watch news every single night? Like, what about like once every week or something like that? So, well, good to know people are still watching at least once a week. But at the same time, we're all checking Twitter, we're all checking Facebook, we're all checking Instagram, and we see the amount of news that we see from ESPN and Fox Sports and whatnot on Twitter. And at the same time, I try to adjust to those changes as well. If I go in for a night and I anchor the 9 o'clock sports, I don't just go in and do the sports on camera on TV and then just like, okay, see you guys, I'll see you tomorrow. I take the time, an extra hour, to put my stories up on Twitter, up on our website or whatever, because I know, especially for us young people here, we want to get our news from Twitter and whatnot. So I think we constantly see it shifting more towards social media, which I try to take advantage of, obviously. I'm sure, and you guys do too, obviously.
Oh, for sure. Social media is one of the most critical, if not the most critical part of our job. And we're trying as our company, and I'm suing these guys as well. Well, at least Ben, radio is a little different, but television-wise, we're trying to get our entire organization to start thinking socially first, newscast second. Because no one's going to tune into our sportscast to see the Grizzlies highlights or the Razorback highlights, because they've already seen them. They've seen them on their phone, they watch the game. So I think our biggest job is to make sports, our sportscasts at least, entertaining and something that you guys want to watch, something you want to view. I think my biggest thing is I want to put something on the air that I would want to watch. Because if I'm putting something on the air that I wouldn't even care about, then people are not going to want to watch it.
Nobody wants to watch, a 4-minute sportscast anymore where it's just highlights, X and O's and whatnot. We try to be creative, and that's the one thing I stress to younger students getting into this business is when you are here at Murrow News 8 or Cable 8 or whatever, be creative. Don't just do the bare minimum. A couple weeks ago, when we had Selection Sunday, Arkansas was announced to go play Butler in Detroit. I could have just came on and started the newscast with me on camera and being like, Arkansas found out today that they'll be playing the Butler Bulldogs in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and that's boring. I get across the information, but it's kind of boring. So what I ended up doing was taking 20-25 seconds of the best highlights from the entire season for the Razorbacks, and I put the instrumental of "Lose Yourself" by Eminem underneath it because they were going to play in Detroit, and that's a good way to get the audience's attention right off the bat, and then you can go into more the details of what's going on. So. Going back to my original point, you want to try to be creative and try to pull that audience in.
And it's all about convenience too. For example, I think not even just for sports, but for news and just in general, people are more inclined to get something off of, watch highlights of a game off of YouTube or get something off of their Twitter page to watch and see what happened with the big game rather than watching a full 2.5-hour game. And I think that's really applicable in radio too, is that, whenever I'm doing my live updates, whenever I'm doing my live sports updates in Seattle, I always have my Twitter feed like on one and taking up pretty much the entire screen of one of my monitors, like keeping up to date with what's going on. And that's really how you get your news now is social media, keeping up to date with what's going on with the different beat reporters and the different athletes. And it makes things a lot more accessible, but also makes things a lot more convenient too.
Well, let's touch on another trend, and we'll start with Ben Wyman, because if I'm right, Ben, you also majored in political science, a double major. Yeah,
I did. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Twitter and Jamil Hill from SportsCenter, and now with the Undefeated, who on Twitter accused President Trump of being a white supremacist. And this violated, apparently, ESPN policy. ESPN, they put out a statement today where their president said, "We're not a political organization." The message being, politics don't have a place in sports. And I wonder if there are stories that you feel you shouldn't cover. How do you handle, athletes who want to talk about political issues because that's an area where they feel empowered to have those discussions when otherwise they might not?
Yeah, great question. I said this yesterday in a class. I personally think that in our society today, sports is one of the last things that can take people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, political leanings, and bring them together. Everyone wants to watch the games together. And so we, in our sports department, we have come to the realization that people go to sports for that escape. They don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to talk about, most people at least, don't want to talk about that. So we try to have fun in our sportscast. Now, that being said, there are plenty of athletes that are using their platforms and for awesome things. We actually have many people in Missoula that some of the Grizzly players that do advocate work for organizations in town, and so we cover that. They use their platform, and we help them use that platform. So I think primarily we want to make our sportscasts fun. We want to make our sportscasts inviting to every single person because, frankly, our audiences are shrinking. So we don't want to keep people out, but we definitely give platforms to the athletes that deserve it. If that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, that was perfect. The perfect example for me is obviously we cover the Cowboys too. I know. down in Little Rock, and during the football season there was that big thing about Jerry Jones and the Cowboys taking a knee during the football game, and going off of what Ben said really quickly, I feel the same way. I want to make sportscasts fun because it's a lot different than news, because sports truly is one of the few things that brings us all together. But there are times where we have to bring up topics like that, and
Sure.
But at the same time, don't show any bias. I gave the facts and whatnot about the Cowboys kneeling with Jerry Jones during that game against Arizona. But, you got to be objective and those kinds of things. But at the same time, I try to stray away from. Don't get me wrong. I give them a platform, but at the same time, I try to make it more fun and less newsy, if that makes sense.
And you mentioned Jamil Hill too. I have made a decision. I don't know. I feel like I've made a subconscious decision to not talk about politics on my social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
There are many times where I type out a tweet and I'm like, nope, I can't. I'm not going to send that.
Mm-hmm.
Jamel gotten really in trouble for doing that. It's something she believes in, and I think she has complete 100% authority to do that on her own personal brand and platforms. But for me personally, in my own brand, I'm just not going to get there. Maybe it's because she's on ESPN and I'm in Missoula, Montana. It's a little bit different. I'm not there yet. So I just decided to kind of separate the two.
I echo those sentiments too, and I think it's really important to emphasize that the whole point of sports is to have fun. Whether you're watching, you're playing, you're going to a game, you're watching on TV, you're listening on the radio. It's all about having fun and keeping it lively. Now, obviously, like they mentioned, there's definitely opportunities to report kind of the political angle of sports in some ways, but I think it's really important to understand that your job is first and foremost is to report the facts first, whether you're in news, sports, or anything, and just keep it lively, keep it fun, keep it open. Yep.
Great. Well, let's. Does anyone have questions that they'd like to ask? Yeah, Austin.
This is really a question that's aimed at Ben Wyman. So you cover the Grizz and the Bobcats.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're kind of isolated from professional sports.
Yeah.
Do you ever struggle, because I know you cover, like you said, high schools and things of that nature. Do you ever struggle with finding content to fill your newscasts or even, to fill your social media?
Yeah, great question.
Can you
Yeah.
repeat the question a little bit?
Totally.
succinctly?
Yeah. So he's saying, I'm in Montana, and do I ever struggle with filling my shows with content, local content? Fun fact: state of Montana, along with the state of Maine, are the only two states in the nation that don't touch a state with a pro team. So Montana is literally surrounded by states that don't have a pro team. So that allows us to be kind of tend to different fan bases. So like NFL, we're like a lot of Packers fans, a lot of Seahawks fans, a lot of Bears fans, Vikings fans. It's a wide mix of stuff. Your question on do we ever struggle? Not really, because even in the summertime, which is the slow time for us, is because we know that, we understand that we can't lean on the Mariners, the Seahawks, we can't lean on the Cowboys. We have to come up with our own content. So we keep that in mind when we're making that stuff. But every now and again, we'll throw in like a World Series highlight or a Super Bowl highlight, the big Final Four, the big stuff. But for the most part, our viewers are tuning in our newscasts to not watch national stuff. They're wanting the local stuff because that's the most important thing that our viewers want. It's the stuff that we can provide them they're not going to get anywhere else. Because they can always go get the World Series highlights from their phone, right? But they can't get what the Montana Grizzly coach said at practice that day. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. We never really struggle.
Do you think that gives you local broadcasts an advantage over, an ESPN or even Seattle, where there's all this competition? You can get your news from various sources,
Yeah.
but if I want to see the highlights from the Cat Grizz game, I have to tune into your show.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's definitely an advantage, and it's something that I've grown to like. I like being a big fish in a small pond. We're only competing with the local newspaper and 2 other affiliates, and that's it. No one else is getting those highlights. No one else is getting those scoops and stories. In Seattle, you have 20, 25 different outlets.
It's
that are
a
going the same
marathon for
stuff.
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What is that like?
Oh my gosh, it's you're all fighting for the same thing essentially. You're all fighting for the same audios, fighting for the same stories, same headlines, all that. Especially in a big market where there's obviously so much going on too. You're constantly checking on the competition. Obviously not keeping 100% look on it, but just staying active in what's going on around you too.
Another question? Tom?
Yeah, to the two Bens, how'd you guys find yourself so far?
There's two
I know.
Bens on the panel, one Ben running the panel.
Yeah.
That's cool. I got a question. Go ahead, Tom.
Two of the three. So, how'd you guys find yourself so far away from where you went to school, where you grew up? Curtis, you can answer too, but farther. So, how'd you guys find your way there?
Well, like I said, I thankfully my first full-time job was in Eugene, Oregon. I grew up in Portland, so I didn't have to start that far away from home. But then I made that big move to Little Rock, Arkansas, which that was the first time I've lived outside the Pacific Northwest my entire life. The reason I decided to take that job in Little Rock was just, at the time I was only 2 years out of college, and it was a chance to move to a top 60 market. And obviously, you look at all the teams you have down there. You got the Razorbacks, you got a bunch of other D1 schools. Get to cover the Cowboys, Memphis Grizzlies, and it's definitely hard to be moving so far away from the Pacific Northwest. There's no question about that. But and that's one thing about our business too, is that you never know where you're going to end up. You never know where you'll end up out of college or 5 years from now or whatever. I could be in Boston in 3 years or something like that, even further away, or I could be back up in Seattle. So, but I think that's what's really fun about our business, is that at the same time, you never know where you might end up, just because I love traveling so much and living in different places.
Yeah. I actually had a connection to Missoula. My parents actually met their freshman year at the University of Montana. So my mom's from Billings. So when that job opened up, I interned at KHQ. KHQ owns our station in Montana. We're all part of the same media group. And so it was a pretty seamless transition from, hey, we have an intern that needs a job. There's a job in Montana. Let's put him in the job in Montana. So it never really felt like I'm far away from home. Now, I personally, this is just a personal thing. I want to stay in the Northwest my whole life. It's just, I love to go travel other places, but I want to stay close to my family and my school and my home. And so, you know, right now I'm kind of looking for that next potential step. I'm kind of coming towards the end of my contract now in Missoula, and so I'm looking at markets in the Pacific Northwest. That obviously narrows my focus a lot, but I love this place. So it hasn't felt far away because it's the teams that I grew up covering, and I'm close to the teams that I follow. So
I think for me, I was extremely blessed that because my first job that I ever applied to out of college was a sports anchoring job in Ray, Colorado. Population of about 4,000 people. Super small. They flew me out and gave me the whole tour of the town. Took about 20 minutes. And but it was very interesting. I mean, and then I came home and I started looking at experiences in Seattle because I've always had my eye on the Seattle market. Now, did I think that I would end up in Seattle right out of college? Absolutely not. I thought I had to go to Ray, Colorado, or small town, and then move your way up to big town. Because that's more or less, for the most part, kind of the usual trajectory for sports anchors and sports reporters in general. Now, my path was definitely not easy because I originally had a sports anchor job on the weekends at a Como News Radio in Seattle. Had that job for about a year and then got a call from my boss saying, hey, you're being laid off for doing a bunch of staff funding cuts. And that was so unbelievably tough for me. And started looking at a bunch of jobs again, and then I got a call from Rich Moore, the head of KJR, that they were looking for a sports anchor and they were interested, and now I'm one of their main guys, so it's awesome. Now, it's really important to know that it's not really about, there's no right or wrong path to really do it. You can start a small market and make your way up to a big market. I consider myself extremely lucky that I'm in a big market this soon. But it's definitely something that everybody should aspire to. Obviously, that's where the money is. That's where the big name sports are, and that's really, my dream has always been work in Seattle, and I'm living that. It's awesome.
So it sounded like you ended up around the country through just sort of various and sundry ways. And do you have though a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan? And in this changing media market, how can you plan ahead?
Well, I definitely have a 5-year plan. That's why I'm kind of jealous of Curtis because he's already in Seattle. That's my big dream, to make it back to Seattle, just because I love Seattle sports. In this business, you kind of want to set up a plan. Like, I have a goal of making it to Seattle, and like Ben said, I'm kind of getting near the end of a contract as well. And I'm starting to look at different options. And you're always trying to think of what, don't get me wrong, you always want to, what am I trying to say here? You always want to, concentrate on your work and give it everything. But at the same time, you kind of have that thought at the back of your head saying, okay, what do I want to do in the long run, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So I definitely have a plan, and I'm usually thinking about what's next.
And, absolutely. Yes, I have a plan. Mm-hmm. I'm also very flexible in the fact my sports director, so I'm the number 2 guy, the weekend guy at my station in Missoula, and he's been there for 10 years, loves Missoula. The station treats him well. They support him well financially. He's the big fish in a small pond. He loves it. And so I'd love to go to Seattle. It's a dream to go to cover the Mariners and the Seahawks and go to Portland, be back where I grew up, but I'm totally flexible with, if I get to a market and I'm like, wow, I really like this place, meet someone nice, start a family, I'm flexible. So
Did you get that speech where it's like, stay single for as long as you can?
I have
that was one of the first things that I was taught, is stay single for the first couple of years of your career. Just because you're moving so much.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, there's many people as they spend a career in Seattle and then they retire to Montana.
Sure.
They aspire to go fly fishing on the Blackfoot River.
Yes.
And so I can see the appeal of that as a native Montanan myself.
Yeah, fly fishing is very difficult. If you've never done it before, it's most of the piece that I did was me catching branches and flipping them into the river.
I think it's important to challenge yourself too. I mean, just in general, go to a place that you haven't been, or at least research it, or look at a position that you never thought you would do. Like for me, when I got out of college, I was like, all right, I'm looking at only play-by-play broadcasting jobs, and that is absolutely it. I'm not looking at any TV stuff, any sports reporting stuff. I don't want any of that. But I mean, now I'm super happy. I'm covering all the teams I grew up watching. So the biggest thing I can tell you guys in terms of a plan is start as early as you possibly can. I started my freshman year of college. I've always had an ambition of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and it's very important to plan ahead and also ask for help too. Ask your professors, ask your advisors, because you're definitely not alone in this business. Ask any of us. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many unbelievable connections here at the Moreau College that sometimes you really don't realize it until you graduate. After you graduate, and then you really start thinking, oh, maybe I should talk to this person about this opening or get some advice on my resume. So
Yeah, networking is tremendously huge in this business. I mean, tremendously huge. So if you have a great contact, make sure to stay in contact with them.
So would you be happy just to stay in Seattle forever, or are you open to moving around the country and like going to like bigger markets like LA or New York or something?
I think for me personally, I'm down to go absolutely anywhere. Seattle has just been it's always been my home. It's where I grew up, but at the same time, I want to challenge myself. I want to go somewhere completely new and just keep moving up the ladder. That's the biggest thing is never be satisfied with your performance. Always look for the next thing to improve on, the next thing to challenge yourself on.
Did you take the single advice too?
Don't answer that question.
Other questions here? Yeah.
Two middle bands, do you guys ever get crap for liking the teams that you do? I'm assuming that you guys like Seattle teams being in a different market, well, especially for you, because I'm assuming that Missoula has either Viking or especially Denver fans. Do you get crap for that?
Yeah. Question is, do I get made fun of for my professional sports likes? Yes, I do. People are always like, oh, you're jumping on the Seahawks bandwagon. It's like, no, I've been liking them since I was born. Get off my back. I think if I can maybe piggyback on your question a little bit, we get asked a lot, are you a fan of the teams that you cover? That's something that you guys have talked about in your journalism classes, to be unbiased, to be completely neutral on the things that you cover. Sports is a little bit different. I think I came into my first week on the job being like, I'm going to be unbiased. I'm not going to care about the results. And you start covering the teams, and you start getting relationships with the players and the coaches, and then you start realizing, like, if the Montana Grizzlies go to the Sweet 16 or they go to the FCS national title game, it helps the city of Missoula. It helps our station profit more, and it helps my personal profile. So when I report on a story or report on a team, I'm completely objective. And I'd say if the defense sucked that day, I'm going to say the defense sucked that day. But in the back of my hand, I'm like, come on, defense. And MSU's like WSU.
The basketball season, they had a tremendous year that unfortunately ended not so great way. But like you said, I always want to be objective, but there'll be times where I'll call out the defense for, or a player making a stupid mistake and getting kicked off the team. Sports is different, definitely in news in that way. You kind of want, like Ben said, you want to root for your team, but not overly, obviously. You still want to be objective, but at the same time, you want to find that perfect mix of being objective while at the same time not being, I don't know what other word I can describe it, but not being absolutely a cheerleader. But like I said, thankfully we haven't played Arkansas yet. So believe me, you wouldn't, like when we lost in the Holiday Bowl, believe me, people at my station, they let me know very quickly.
Yeah.
So do you guys save kind of like the X's and O's? This was the score. These were the highlights for the newscast, and use more of the come on defense like on your Twitter or social media like that, or do you kind of integrate the investment in the team into the newscast as well?
I do a little bit of both. I think my enthusiasm and the way that I deliver the news and deliver the highlights, deliver the information, that should show the audience my enthusiasm, and I try to do the same on Twitter. Yeah, I think a little bit of both.
Yeah.
You can balance it.
Yeah, there's a like I said before, there's a perfect way to balance things. You can give the highlights and what happened in the game while giving sort of your own opinions and commentary. Like I said,
Yeah.
just trying to find that perfect balance in between the two.
Definitely.
Like your job is to make it exciting. That's really your job. And I mean, even though I grew up watching the Mariners and the Seahawks, you know, when I was a kid, there's definitely a part in the back of my head, like Ben Wyman said, that it's like, oh, come on, like why, like why, come on, Luke.
Been saying that since 2001 with the Mariners. But
Yeah, but the biggest thing is yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all have. Just know your audience. You know, the biggest thing is get excited. I mean, your audience, you know, my audience is Mariners fans, Seahawks fans, and all that. So if I'm reporting a story about them, you know, obviously make it exciting. And if obviously if it's a sad story or if it's a bad story, then adapt to that situation.
Yeah, go ahead.
You guys are talking about kind of like politics when it comes to your social media. I kind of have two questions. One question is, can you like say "Go Seahawks"? Or can you guys express that on Twitter? And can you guys say that without like kind of feeling biased, I guess, or like without getting in trouble?
Lo-
in your guys' respective markets?
Yeah, like I said, I don't want to be an absolute cheerleader. Like I'll say something on Twitter, like saying, you know, it's a big game today against Butler or whatnot, but I'm not going to say, "Go Hogs, give them hell" or whatever like that. You know, I'm not going to go that far.
Yeah, and I will go. You know, I will keep my own personal fandom up there because I think people connect that. People like being, you know, following other fans. So I will say "Go Hawks." You know, I will say "Go M's" and "Go Cougs." You know, but I would never tweet out or say on air "Go Grizz." You know, so.
Just know your boundaries, know your lines.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Is there's definitely a fine line between putting in a hashtag for Go Hawks and putting it in once like every hour. You know what I mean? There's definitely a difference between that. So there's definitely a gray area where absolutely like be as excited as you want, but definitely know your limits, know your audience, and you know, act to yourself in a professional manner.
Yeah.
In terms of like, I'm kind of focusing on the social media aspect for you guys personally. Like, let's say, so you guys all have like your niche markets and the teams that your audiences are involved in. But like, if you guys have different aspirations or like you had different interests in sort of like national stuff, like, are you allowed to kind of like tweet stuff about that, or do you guys have to like focus kind of on your specific branch because you guys are a part of the like your affiliation?
Yeah, I mean, well, for me at least, obviously, you need to know your audience, and you need to, for me, you know, tweet out a lot of Razorback, Arkansas State Cowboys, all that kind of stuff. But I still tweet out about national stuff too. You know, just because we're in Little Rock, Arkansas, and obviously the Razorbacks and all of them are the big story, people tune into national sports as well. So I'll tweet stuff out about, you know, anything else. Even sometimes my annoying Go Cougs Washington State tweets to people in Arkansas who have no idea what the heck I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. You know, you have to be. You don't have to be a robot on social media. I think hopefully you're not taking that away from what we're saying. Is, you know, people want to. The more followers you get, you will get more followers by being yourself and talking about what you like, talking about what you don't like. I mentioned politics. I just don't talk about politics. I just decided not to, but I talk about other stuff too. Like, my boss like ranks food on his Twitter account. People dig that up, like stuff like that. You know, like it's fun. You know, that can be a fun aspect of social media and connecting with our audience that way too.
I think it's important to also find, that's actually a very good question. I think it's also important to also find ways to localize national news, if that makes any sense. For example, you know, the national anthem protests. You know, obviously everyone knows what's going on. It was happening with almost every single team in the league, if not every single team in the league for the NFL, and just find a way to adapt to, okay, this story in New York is happening. How does this relate to what the Mariners are doing? So it's definitely a thing where you want to stay as local as possible, because obviously that's what people care most about. But definitely find creative ways to localize national stories.
You have a question?
Yeah. Would you say you have to kind of like pick a sport to focus on, or just know about all different sports?
No. You honestly want to maybe do the opposite, right? You want to be able to talk about lots of different sports. I actually remember in Maroon News 8, I had to cover a rugby game.
Yep.
I've never watched rugby in my life. So the night before, I watched a couple YouTube videos on rugby, and I got to cover rugby, right? So, I think maybe farther down the line, you get up in the bigger markets, talking about maybe network stuff, then you can maybe kind of start getting a little bit particular. But in a local market that you're going to probably start in television or radio, you're going to be able to cover everything.
Yeah, when I was
fly fishing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, I remember I was interviewing for an internship when I was in college, and the person I was interviewing for, he said, "Okay, what do you know about the MLB?" And I told him what I know. "What do you know about the NBA?" And I told him all I know. "What do you know about the NHL?"
It's in Canada?
And he said, "You need to know about every single sport." Every single sport, because once you get higher and higher, and I think, especially when you get up to higher markets, with Seattle, you have MLB, hopefully the Sonics come back one day, NHL coming soon, you need to know about everything, because, unless you go to like NBA TV or something like that, it's tremendously important you know about every single sport that you'll cover.
And it also shows potential employers that you have a knack for trying something new, challenging yourself. Because the last thing that employers want is somebody that's going to come in and say, all right, I just want to do baseball, just want to do basketball, or just want to do football. Like, nah, they're not even going to look at your resume.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to be as diverse as you possibly can, because that really, in a way, shows the employer that you're willing to challenge yourself and you're willing to learn new things, too.
Ben, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to bring up a different point, but if you're going to...
Nope, to bring it up.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I'm going to change. I'm going to ask my own question and answer my own question, if that's cool.
Very wise.
And we kind of talked about this yesterday. It's kind of
Yeah.
love to bring it up. So I think when you guys think of sports anchors, you're thinking like highlights, right? Like we're showing all the games that happen. We are finding with local television, and even television as local as Seattle, that people are not watching sportscasts anymore, right? That you guys, because you have it all on your phones. So we're trying in the local markets, small markets, trying to figure out ways to get people to stick around for our sportscast. And what that means is that instead of running wall-to-wall wallpaper highlights, we're trying to find those sports stories that pull people in. And that's why I just want to mention this, because here in Murrow, you need to be able to find, I want you guys to start thinking about stories that have to do with sports that aren't X's and O's, right? Because I think everyone can talk about how the Cougs did on Saturday night, right? Everyone can talk and analyze the game. Anyone can do that. But not everyone can go get the cool sports feature that will pull people that don't even like sports to watch the sport, or watch the feature. So that's maybe the biggest thing that we're going through as a company, is trying to find those stories that will pull people in that don't even like sports.
Well, the one trend I keep seeing lately with TV stations is that with a lot of TV or with sports departments, they're trying to get them to do more features rather than highlights.
Right.
Like at one of our competitors in Little Rock, that's their philosophy. We want more features rather than highlights, because we know at this point features are going to pull people in. You can get highlights and stats from, like we talked about throughout this panel, on your phone or on Twitter or whatnot. But are you going to tune in to are you going to rather tune into highlights for 4 minutes, or are you going to tune in for like a minute and a half of highlights and then a feature story on a Razorback basketball player whose dad was brutally murdered when he was younger? I know you're probably thinking the same answer. So, so features are tremendously important. And going off of what Ben said, get as much experience as you can while you're here at Washington State, not only in front of the camera, but producing great feature stories as well, because they mean so much in our business right now.
We have time for one last question here. Yeah.
So I know radio's made the move to podcast for putting out sports a lot of the time. What do you TV guys think TV is going to do? As you're saying, it's harder to keep people tuned in, harder to get people to tune in the first place. What do you think your move's going to be for, upping your viewership in the future as cable potentially dies out a little bit?
Well, going back to social media, we know how big of a platform that is now. From what I found working in Little Rock, that's how I'm able to attract a younger audience is through Twitter. We know the older audience is going to tune in on TV, but we know, obviously
They're getting older.
Yeah, we're all still relatively young. We're still looking at Twitter all the freaking time. So, keep using Twitter, keep using social media, because we see it more and more how much how much more, importance social media really has in this business nowadays.
I don't think the local television stations will ever go away. I think the way you're going to get them is going to change eventually.
I guess that answers my question a little bit better.
Yeah.
Is how are we going to view it more so, I guess.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What medium are we going to be looking at? Especially long form, because like social media is great for like stats and quick coverage and stuff, but like you're mentioning how people are liking to go to that feature story. Like where are we going to be getting that content from?
I mean, I know we're our company is trying to really start pushing, like partnering with like Roku and like on demand and like stuff like that, where it's like you don't have to have a cable subscription. You can just go onto your Roku device and 2 clicks and you can watch 5 different news stories that we had that day, or a full newscast or something like that online. I think the way that we keep people coming back to local news is what we just were talking about, is finding the stories that you can't find on your Twitter feed. Because the second you start looking up from your phone and looking around and finding those cool stories, that's what's going to pull people in and keep us relevant in the media landscape. So that's why it's so important right now to find those sports feature stories here in Pullman, to show those potential employers that, yeah, this is what I can do. That I can go out and find a cool sports story and make it something that everyone would want to watch. That's how we're going to stay relevant, I think.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks to the panel for chatting with us today, and hope you had a great symposium.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.